and this is how we can take them home or get them help. So that program has been a wonderful program for some of those who have cognitive.
Hello, this is Irma Baker welcoming you to our show. We're sponsored by RSVP, the Retired Senior Volunteer Program, which is a part of Mature Services. We like to think of our show like a kaleidoscope, bringing you a constantly changing group of bright objects such as individuals, organizations, and activities in our viewing area. After these messages, we'll be right back with today's guest.
RSVP of Summit County has been making a difference in our community since 1972. RSVP volunteers are increasing the quality of life by participating in programs and organizations that provide important services to the community. RSVP matches personal interests and skills with opportunities to serve. If you're interested in adding more meaning to your life and improving the lives of others, please call 330-253-4597, extension 166.
Welcome back. Our guest today is Steve Passion. Steve is the University Archivist at Kent State University. Steve, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about what you do at Kent State.
The University Archivist, I work in a department of the library, University Libraries. The department's called Special Collections and Archives, and it's a hybrid department that has rare books, special collections, manuscripts, musical scores, poems, and prose and poetry from different authors, and the university's archives, that is the historical records of the university. And so my part of the job is working on the university records.
And as part of that, then you have quite a good handle on Akron history as well, and isn't that a kind of special interest of yours?
It is. I, for about a decade, was the director of the Summit County Historical Society once upon a time, and so I became very interested in local history at that time. I'm not native to the area, but sometimes you move to an area and it becomes more your home than your childhood home was.
You really get an interest in learning about your new area. So you kind of dug into Akron history. Well, what's interesting to me right now, and I think to many of our viewers, is that here for a number of years now, we've been going through the recession. And it has been hard, and it's really hit an area like Akron very hard. And that kind of makes us think about what was it like during the Great Depression. Was it worse than it is now?
The Great Depression was worse. It was considerably worse. We've been pretty unhappy about double-digit unemployment, unemployment rates of above 10%, and it's declined some here in the past year. But during the Great Depression, for more than a decade, it averaged over 20%, so twice as high as it is now. And Akron, specifically the city, had a very high point of 60% unemployment for a time in 1932.
60% unemployment, that is a phenomenal figure. That must have been, any unemployment is a hardship, but to have 60% of your population out of work had to be just excruciating.
It was, and just as an example, the rubber industry, which was Akron's meat and potatoes at that time, almost immediately at the outset of the Great Depression, Akron lost 25,000 rubber jobs in very short order, just in that one industry. There were 750 families that listed their income as being apple sales on street corners that lived in Akron. So it's a depth of depression that we can barely grasp now, and only my grandparents and my parents can remember a time that was much, much worse than this one is.
What was it like for families, workers of that time in our area?
Well, it was very difficult. Many families had one wage earner, and when that person lost their job, there were lots of other people like them in the same town. And so in this area and many areas, a lot of people left. And at the time there was a lot of competition just to get a particular job. One of the photographs I shared with you is a photograph of men standing in line trying to get a few jobs as they opened up at B.F. Goodrich during the Great Depression. And you see a mixture of people, some of them fairly well dressed in the line. You see a mixture of diverse men. You see African American men. You see white men. You see some people who are embarrassed to be in the line. They're kind of shielding their faces from the photographer. And it was something that that generation hadn't expected. It really hurt them emotionally to suddenly be without their income. And so when the Roosevelt administration was elected in 1932, they embarked on public work relief programs, which was kind of a new thing in this country. And actually Herbert Hoover had also started some of that because, of course, he was president for the first few years of the Great Depression. So the WPA, the PWA, the National Youth Administration, the Civilian Conservation Corps, they were all aimed at different parts of the economy and even at different age groups to provide employment that would produce public uses for these people's talents and even train people in other talents.
Well, tell us a little bit about some of those organizations. The only one I've ever heard of was the WPA.
The WPA was perhaps the largest, along with the Civilian Conservation Corps. Civilian Conservation Corps was aimed at young people, as was the National Youth Administration. And so quite often people from this area would go and work for the CCC, and they would go to work in a park, like one of the national parks or some of the city parks in the area. They did a lot of different things, but it was kind of aimed at those young people, particularly young men out of work. The WPA was a much broader program, which was enacted in 1935 as the Federal Emergency Relief Act. And at the time it was $4.8 billion, and it was meant to be temporary. It was really, at its outset, to be a one-year deal. And, but it continued to exist until 1943. And so it went on throughout the Depression and literally employed tens of thousands of people in this area and all over the country to do public works.
What kind of public works were those?
All sorts of things. There's some very visible things, things that are still around now. Stadiums, the high school stadium in my own hometown in Illinois is a WPA stadium. The Rubber Bowl in Akron is a WPA stadium. And the whole project was almost a $500,000 project, but the local community only had to come up with $30,000. Of course, Akron didn't have the $30,000, so what they did was sell tickets for the stadium opening before they ever built the stadium. And they were able to sell 30,000 tickets, so people had a ticket to come to the opening, but that ticket paid for the local amount so that that project would go forward. And that was fairly late in the Depression, in 1939, 1940. It opened in the summer of 1940 to great fanfare. And of course, the stadium's still there and was used up until 2 years ago by the Akron Zips and by various high schools. It's still there. It's interesting because it was made possible by an earlier project, a PWA project, Public Works Administration, which was an improvement of the Akron Airport, Akron Municipal Airport. And there had been a building built there, the runways had been extended, and they needed earth to extend the runways. And they did an excavation on the hill next to where the airport was. And that excavation created a natural amphitheater. One of the pictures I shared with you is before there was a stadium there, and you can see that it's been recently cut out part of the earth. Engineers determined that you could build an amphitheater, build a stadium into that slope.
That's incredible engineering of that time. You figure how
it's a lot of
desperate people
forethought.
were. Yes.
And those kinds of projects would literally employ hundreds of men. The Rubber Bowl in particular, I think 350 men worked on that project. And I don't know whether they actually envisioned this stadium lasting all the years it did, 60 years and more. And my hometown high school football stadium is still in use. It's still the stadium that they use. So a lot of substantial things were built. There were a lot of other kinds of things that aren't maybe quite so noticeable, such as bridges and dams and waterways, streets, sewers, things that people kind of forget maybe that was a WPA project.
Well, I think the viaduct is one of those projects, isn't it?
It is. The North Hill Viaduct in Akron was built in 1922 to span for pedestrian and vehicle traffic downtown Akron with the North Hill section of Akron. And by 1937, it was crumbling. Just 15 years later, there were chunks of concrete falling off, and down below in the valley were houses and businesses. There were actually chunks of concrete falling on things, and it was declared unsafe. Another photograph I gave you is a policeman standing at the closed viaduct because they actually closed it as being unsafe, first to pedestrians, and then later they didn't allow any traffic. Then they began to try to hatch a scheme, and the city, the county, and the state really couldn't come up with the money to repair the viaduct. I gave you a couple of photographs of this. There's one with a worker working with a jackhammer up on top of the bridge pilings, and if you look closely at that picture, you'll see his only safety line is a loosely bound rope. If he falls off the bridge, this rope's going to save him, I guess. But they took that bridge all the way down to its piers. They took the whole surface of the bridge down and built a new bridge. And again, hundreds of workers were employed to work on that project. And that was completed. And that viaduct, the rebuilt viaduct, lasted another 40 years.
What amazes me about what you're talking about here and what we see in the fact that so many of these structures have lasted through a long, long time is that here was a great number of workers who had no skills to do this. They were coming from all different kinds of occupations and such that they had lost. Now here they were doing this unskilled labor, and yet, however it was pulled together, they managed to build such substantial structures.
Many of them learned important skills. There were also skilled people working at different levels. There were supervisors and timekeepers and engineers, architects. So there were people employed by the WPA who were skilled. And many of those positions are sort of lost to history. There were artists that were employed. They employed artists to actually do art, but also to make things like educational visual aids for the schools. I believe I think I gave you a picture of some men that are using their painting skills to paint some placards that are used as stand-up easels used in Akron city schools at the time. They also employed writers. There was the American Guide, which was a kind of history and current state of the United States, and they employed writers to work on that. There were sewing rooms. I gave you a photograph of, there were 400 women that worked at one sewing room in downtown Akron in a couple of different locations, and they were employed for the purpose of making clothing and bedding for the underprivileged. They also made dolls and gifts that were given at Christmas to kids. Santa Claus would actually come and pick up these dolls that they made. So they learned how to make dolls, and they learned how to make quilts and coverlets. Many of them knew already how to do these things. And it was a very broad-based thing. There were a lot of people working, particularly for the WPA. At its high point in this area, there were 21,000 people that worked for the WPA alone, which made it one of the top 5 employers in the county, in Summit County, in 1938.
Were most of the people in our area working for some kind of government project at that time, of those various ones that you mentioned?
Not most of them, but a very large number. Private industry did a lot of different things to try to accommodate the problem. The changing in the lengths of shifts in the rubber companies to 6-hour shifts, trying to employ more people, and of course they got paid less. You would see other companies where the board of directors would, across the board, cut people's salaries. I recall that Towel Cadillac in Akron, at the high point of the Depression, they sold about a car a month. So a total of like 12 or 14 cars in a year.
And cars were not that expensive at that time, were they? Or relatively, I guess they were.
They were, especially Cadillacs, but there weren't a lot of people who could buy them at the time, but somehow they kept going. So private industry would try to make concessions to the situation and try to survive. Most private industry took some sort of loss at the time, had a few losing years, and tried to work their way out of it. There was actually some tension between private industry and these public works projects. The idea was to pay the public works workers slightly less than the going rate. So they didn't want to see private industry get underbid by public projects. And so there were controversies from time to time. There was a trucking strike in the area in 1937 and 1939 again, which had to do with out of county and out of, not anywhere near the region even, truckers being hired to work on projects, because the truckers nearby had gone on strike for a better wage. And there actually was a little bit of violence where they attacked the foreign trucks, which may have come as far away as Columbus, as they came into town. So there was some controversy. The WPA in particular had very few, this is an old word, very few boondoggles. Other projects like the PWA was accused of having a lot of boondoggles, which are make-work projects, raking leaves, or moving dirt from one side of a place to another. People not really doing something that was considered constructive at the time. But there was a lot that was built, and a lot of that is still around. Other examples, there's a set of steps that lead up from, in downtown Akron, from the inner belt up to what's called Cadillac Hill. They're called the Glendale Steps, and they were built by the WPA to get people from that hill to downtown before the inner belt was there. Downtown really started at the bottom of the hill at that time.
Well, more people walked at that time too, didn't they?
They did, and just having transportation was a difficult time. So they made those steps, and now they're kind of the steps to nowhere, although they've been preserved by local groups because they're kind of beautiful in their own right. They're nicely constructed of stone and masonry and cut stone, and they're very attractive. The Goodyear Park in downtown Akron, between the Ocasek building and the courthouse, that was a park that was built during the WPA. They did work on almost all the parks, Mason Park, Perkins Woods Park. There's an amphitheater in Perkins Woods that's a WPA amphitheater built of stone.
And these are still in use today?
They're still there. I don't know how much they're used now. There's another one at Chestnut Ridge in the Kenmore section of Akron. It's quite beautiful, and it was built during the Great Depression, and there are still pictures that exist of plays and things and performances, concerts that took place up on that hill in that amphitheater.
It really makes you stop and think that people were desperate for pennies at that time, and certainly wages were not high. Anything that they could make. You said that a number of people claimed apple selling as their total income. I think that, from my aspect, and not having lived through the Depression, I really thought that was something that happened only in New York. There were apple sellers around here?
There were apple sellers all over the place. There were families that sent their kids out and had them sell packs of chewing gum on the street, or sell comic books or magazines out on the street. And it would just be a family thing. They'd buy these things and they would send the kids out to sell things because people would want to sell to the kids. A lot of people of that generation who were children at that time, my parents in particular, they went out and did some work for money at the time just to help out. Multiple families would live in the same place. I know at different times I had some of my ancestors lived in boarding houses during the Depression. My grandfather grew up in a boarding house, and it was because they just didn't have the money to keep a house of their own. So it's a much more difficult time, but you're seeing some of the same things now. You see some families moving back together. You see children that have gone to college, gotten a degree, but they can't find a job in this market, and they end up back home again. And that recalls this earlier time of hardship.
It seems like people tend to band together, whether in families or communities or organizations, to meet the kind of obstacles. And yet, good has come out of it in terms of all these remnants that we have of the public works projects, the conservation projects of the time. Do you have any stories about the time?
Well, I have a few. One of my favorite stories was told to me, and I've done some oral histories with people over time. A woman who was a grown woman at the time, and on her street in 1936, there was a WPA paving project. They were working on the street, and they were kind of at the end of the street working their way toward her, and she was very curious because they were all wearing yellow buttons, but she couldn't really see what they said, the buttons. And finally, in the middle of the day, they carried jugs that they had drinking water in, and they actually came to her door, and she saw what buttons they were wearing, and it was you know, this is a Roosevelt program, the WPA. It's part of the Works Progress Administration, and they were wearing Alf Landon buttons in 1936, and he's a Republican contender for president for Roosevelt's second term. There were his little sunshine or sunflower type buttons. I find that hilarious that they were all Alf Landon supporters, but working on a Roosevelt designed project. There are a lot of stories that are kind of like that. They're kind of moving because there were still just some funny things at the time that took place.
There's probably a wealth of information that you have in the archives at Kent State University. Now, are those open only to people at the university?
They're not. They're open to the public. And actually, we get requests for information from all over the world. As pretty much everyone who's an American knows, there was an incident in May 1970 on our campus. And that continues to be something that people research, that grade school kids across the country do as their History Day presentation. It's one of our strong collections where we deal with what happened on that day and what its implications were for civil disobedience and free speech and crowd control and all the different aspects of that. The litigation that came afterward and that sort of thing. So history isn't all positive, as we know. But we also have information on the university. The university just completed its centennial year. Kent State started as a normal school. There wasn't an abnormal school that I know of, but no, it's a teaching school where teachers are trained. It was Kent Normal School originally. But became a four-year university within a few decades. We have all the history that we can collect on all of these periods, and some of it is sports history. We have some sports individuals who've made it big time in the pros. We actually have one playing for the Browns right now, which is kind of exciting to have someone nearby who did well on our team and came back and got his degree after he was already a pro. It was a wonderful story.
Well, it's been wonderful having you with us today.
Well, thank
we
you
really
very much.
appreciate you coming and sharing this, and I hope that people do take advantage of the archives that you have available there. Anyone who has an interest in history, do get in touch with Kent State University. You can certainly find them through the Kent State website, and they're open to the public. It is another one of the wonderful gems that we have here in our area. And we thank you for watching our show today, for watching our view through our kaleidoscope. We hope you enjoyed it and that you remember our sponsor, RSVP. RSVP is a part of Mature Services, and that offers adults age 55 and over volunteer activities in our local community. For more information about RSVP, just call the number on the screen. This is Irma Baker saying goodbye for now.
Since 1971, RSVP has been matching volunteers' talents to community needs. RSVP is affiliated with the Corporation for National and Community Service, a national organization that supports service and volunteering through grant-funded projects. Volunteers organize neighborhood watch programs, tutor children, renovate homes, plant community gardens, assist victims of natural disasters, and serve their communities in many other ways. RSVP offers maximum flexibility and choice to its volunteers as it matches the personal interests and skills of Americans 55 and older with opportunities to serve their communities. If you're interested in adding more meaning to your life and improving the lives of others, please call 330-253-4597, extension 166.
Distribution of this program has been made possible through the generous support of the Kaler Law Firm. At the Kaler Law Firm, attorney Jim Kaler helps seniors and veterans who need long-term care keep some of their life savings in the family. For more information, visit www.protectingseniors.com. The mission of the Kaler Law Firm is protecting a senior's life savings.